All right. Hi.
Hi. Oh, I should
Hi.
be starting.
I know, right? We'll wait for folks to join us in the comments here, but hello to everyone hanging out with us today, talking about joy and ritual with Casper. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. I love that it's my job to find joy in this moment.
Yes. Yes, it very
we're
much
gonna
is.
we're gonna have to do that together. But I'm doing all right.
Yeah,
I'm doing all right. It's
good.
yeah, it's been a good weekend, very quiet. I started a new murder mystery novel, so that always puts me in a good
Oh,
mood. Yeah.
always.
That's
Always
it.
fun.
What is it?
It's Ngaio Marsh, who I've never read before. She's known as like one of the queens of crime with like Agatha Christie.
Mm.
I'm a big Agatha Christie fan, but this is my first Marsh novel. I couldn't even tell you the title of the book. It's just another like body is found dead in a big country house, and it's great.
Perfect.
What is
Well,
enjoyable about that?
yes, finding joy where we can. So, if folks are new, hello, welcome. My name is Janae. I'm the Director of Leadership and Education at the Harry Potter Alliance. And this is my lovely colleague, Katie.
Hello.
That's Katie's only introduction. That's all she's got. But we are hosting a series of live streams, discussions about joy and returning to ourselves and figuring out kind of what are our next steps as people and as a people after the year that was 2020. And we're super excited to talk to Casper about all of your work. I just finished reading your book like last week and super enjoyed it. So it's all very fresh in my mind. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what led you to this kind of work?
Well, the first thing I want to say is thank you, not only for having me today, but also for the amazing work of the HPA, because the HPA was actually a part of inspiring a big part of my life, which was the Harry Potter and the Sacred Text podcast. I was so excited to see how, fan communities were coming together, not just to enjoy the stories that they loved and be fans of it together, but to actually mobilize around those values and to do something in the real world with the stories and the characters and the narrative of the books that we love, the stories that we love. So I owe a huge amount to the HPA for just your imagination and your vision as an organization. So genuine thanks, first of all. And hi, everyone. Great to see you in the comments. It's always so nice to know there's like real humans out there. So thanks so much for saying hello. So my work is really thinking about the future of community and spirituality. I get to do that in a couple of different places. I graduated from Harvard Divinity School some time ago now, but I remain a Ministry Innovation Fellow there. I co-host the podcast Harry Potter and the Sacred Text with my wonderful co-host Vanessa Zoltan and our third co-creator Ariana Nedelman. And it's just the most generous community. I mean, you know what Harry Potter fans are like. It's just like an unending source of goodness and courage and sweetness. Like I honestly feel like I'm the worst member of our community. If people could see my insides, like I'm not that nice. Like I'm not worthy. But so it's just incredible, and it started out as a very small class where we got together every Wednesday night, for an hour and a half over 2 semesters, reading all 7 books, and not just reading them as texts to enjoy, but to think about these texts as a way to look at our own lives. So one way that I think about it is that when we read a sacred text, really what it's doing is giving us a mirror, and it gives us an opportunity to think about our own life through the lives of the character, so that we get to see different sides of ourselves or different contexts of experiences that we're in, and that it can help us think differently about it. So the podcast is a big part of my life. And then my day job with Sacred Design Lab, where I kind of study the trends of what's happening, especially in America, as more and more people become less and less religious, but nonetheless often still have a real sense of spirituality or connection to something bigger than themselves or meaning and purpose, but it's shaped in a different way. And it takes place, for example, in fitness communities or fan groups or creative groups or justice groups. So really thinking very expansively when we use words like spirituality, to think about it in its biggest sense, and to figure out what are the ways in which, as we look to the future, what are the ways in which we can be held in community, communities that ground us in the values that we have, and that unleash us to change the world to be more like how we want it to see, how we want it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the work that you're doing. It's so interesting to me, honestly. Like and I mean, part of that's my own background, right? I went to Catholic school when I was growing up, and so it's, religion was a very big part of my early life, and now is sort of a I don't want to say non-existent, because I
Right.
have the same sort of feeling that you just talked about, of that feeling of like, there is spirituality. I feel connected to something greater, all the things you were talking about. But it is interesting because it was a very big part of my life. And I intentionally, when I was old enough to make the choice, I had this feeling of like, I'm getting this need filled other places. And like, I think it's fascinating to know that there are people studying that and trying to think about like, how do we fulfill that human need intentionally?
And it's, Katie, it's so interesting because you've had this journey of like starting in a very religious context and moving to kind of a different way of thinking about it. I started with no religion. I grew up in England. 6% of people in England go to church on a Sunday. It's a very, very secular culture. Yeah. Even though the Queen, of course, is the head of the church. So it's a very interesting constitutional question, but that's a different conversation. But so I ended up, being an activist really involved in climate change, mobilizing young people, around the climate negotiations, and feeling like, if I'm trying to change policy on climate, it's not enough just to have good policy recommendations. It's not enough just to have good politics and know who to lobby and build power politically, but it's also thinking about what's the paradigm in which we're living. And so, do we think of the natural world as a resource for us to use, or do we see ourselves in relationship with the natural world? And so we would never use a word like resource, because actually we're part of nature, and you can't just like extricate a piece of yourself like that. So what I'm trying to say is that I started in this very secular place and ended up thinking more and more about religion. And so I feel like there's a lot of us now in that kind of middle ground where it's not like, and I'm gay. So like, I am so aware of the horrific impact of institutional religion on queer people, on women, on people of color, on people who've been colonized. So I'm not looking at this naively, but I think there are more and more of us in this kind of in-between space where we're like, we want something and we see the need for something, but like, we're not ready to like engage with everything that was. It has to be something new. And so that's the space where I find my like creativity lives, and where I just see so much potential, and why I love doing things like Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, because it's one way of trying to translate some of those ancient practices that can be really useful, but to do it in a way that really works for us today.
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing the two of you talk, and reading your book was so interesting. I feel like I'm kind of like in a middle part of that spectrum, because there's the book. I had one of those experiences where I had a very bad experience with religion when I was younger, and so I kind of had that, like, especially when I was a kid, kind of really pushed back hard against it. And now, as I've gotten older, I'm really finding myself kind of searching back for the kind of ritual and like spirituality you're talking about in the book. So it's been really interesting to kind of hear this conversation, and to hear how you talk about it and how folks are talking about it now, especially when it seems like, everyone says now more than ever, but now more than ever, it really feels like we need some of this stuff in our lives. Yeah.
Well, Janae, I mean, first of all, I'm just sorry that, whatever experience that was, it's just so shitty. And it makes me really angry, because I feel like when we think about spirituality and religion, my best metaphor for it sometimes is to think of a fire, because it can be a place, like a beautiful candle, right, which makes a room look magical, or it can be like a fireplace in which people gather and share food and build community. But it can also burn your house down. And when you're hurt, by religion or by spirituality, that goes so deep, because it's playing at that like deep, yeah, it's dealing with fundamental questions of who we are and who we belong to, and are we good or bad, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And so when it goes wrong, it can really hurt us. And you know, I still have that when I go into a church building which has like pews. I immediately like, there's just something in my brain which is like the little gay child, which is just like, oh, this place is not going to be for me, you know. So I so empathize with anyone who has that sense of like, this is not for me. But at the same time, you know, I feel like there's more and more of us doing the Enneagram, or like, you know, reading tarot cards, or like the crystals, right? So like, there are these interesting signs of a spirituality culture which is happening at the margins. And I think women and people of color and queer people are often at the vanguard of social change movements. And I think that the same is true when we look at spirituality, you know, whether it's moon circles, whether it's queer circles that are gathering, you know, there are some really, really beautiful examples of new forms of spirituality that are still drawing on something old, but that are kind of relevant and seek to undo some of that damage.
Yeah, I don't remember who tweeted this, but I saw a tweet that was like, MBTI is just astrology for people with a college degree. Like, yeah, that's true. Called out.
I buy it.
Absolutely.
I buy it because you're real into that, and you're also very into being a Virgo, and I think those two things are related to each other.
Sagittarius in the house. Sagittarius.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yes,
right?
absolutely.
It's that season. Yeah, it's some of my favorite activist spaces I've been in are ones that intentionally invoke spirituality in some way, and in a way that a lot of the interesting places I've been, in my opinion, are places that are really looking into like, hey, our ancestors knew something in the connection to nature. If you go far enough back, right, as white people, talking about your ancestors is a very fraught thing, because a lot of our ancestors were people who did extremely bad things. Sorry, my phone is going off and I'm trying to make it stop.
The ancestors are calling Katie. They're
like, don't be talking shit about me this time. Hopefully that wasn't them, but I did hang up. But anyway, like, if you go far enough back in just about any culture, you get back to these religions that are really grounded, or these belief systems that are really grounded in nature and in the connection to like the sort of global spirits that that have everyone connected. You know, I'm doing a bad job of this, but they're activist spaces that really try to draw on that power and try to say, like, we're going through a time right now where we have lost this, but it is still in us. It is still a part of our lineage, and it is still something that we can reclaim. And I don't know a lot. I have not been in a lot of like religious spaces that use that framing, but I have been in a number of activist spaces that use that framing. And I personally find it empowering. So I'm sure you know that there are religious spaces doing that, but I think a lot of them are not. And I wonder if like they're missing the boat a little bit. I don't know.
Well, I love that you're pointing us to this, because I think one of the dangers when we're doing social justice work or we're engaged in activism is it's such an outward focus, right? Like it's about taking action, it's about mobilizing people, it's about impacting laws and legislation. And so it can be a lot of this kind of movement. And I think any kind of spiritual wisdom that comes to play, and I think it sounds like you've been in some of those spaces, is where there's a going out, but then also a going in. And the image that I love for this is kind of, you know, the infinity loop, right? So you're always you're always having time for reflection, and there's always time for action. There's time to kind of build community and to tend to what we have going on amongst us, and then there's time to bring that out into the world. And if we're only doing one of those, it's either exhausting or it's a little narcissistic, right? And so it's like you need that balance, and that's a sign of health, I think, for a community that's taking action together. Is like, well, does it also have rituals that take care of themselves? Does it have opportunities for the community to tend to one another and to take care of the quality of the relationship? And at the same time, if you're looking at a spiritual community, are they only doing that, or are they also making sure that they're, you know, not just doing acts of service, but really acts of justice? And so that inner and outer frame, I just find such a helpful way of thinking about how change happens. Because if we look, and this is how I ended up in divinity school, if we look at the social movements that inspire us, right, whether it's the civil rights action or the suffragette movement, or all sorts of movements across the world, not just in the US, so often the people at the center of it had some sort either of a spiritual practice for themselves, or they were grounding themselves in a religious or a spiritual tradition that gave them narrative arcs to help make sense of what was happening. It gave them stories. It gave them songs, right? Like, if you can't sing together, the world is poorer for it. And then maybe this is my one like quibble with Dumbledore, is like, it's actually worth all singing the same song because it feels really good. But like it's those kind of, and this is what in my work we call, you know, spiritual resources or spiritual technologies, is that you have a song that you can sing together. It's a way of lifting up your spirit, lifting up your sense of hope and courage in the midst of difficulty. And I think that's what's so important when we're in an activist group together, is that we have some of those practices, some of those resources to cultivate our inner lives as well as our outer lives. But I love that you have that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks. I think that's a little bit what we're trying to help folks do too with these fan activist healing retreats, because we were looking at really like, this is the end of a year that has been there's had to be a lot of turning inward, but like I don't think, but like with a tremendous amount of like looking outward and being like, holy shit, everything's burning down, I gotta do something. And also like everything in my own life is blowing up. And we were just like, what is the capstone for that year?
Yeah. Well, and also, at least if your year was anything like mine, you know, I'm spending a lot of my time alone, but am I really going inward, or am I just playing Mario Kart and eating Ben and Jerry's? You know, like, like there's a difference between, and for me,
spirituality looks different for everyone.
That's for sure. But you know, I think it's easy to think about, you know, to think about time spent alone as somehow like tending to your inner life, but it's not, because it actually takes just as much effort, I think, to do that kind of stuff well as it does to plan a great campaign, right? Or to put together a really awesome action. And so it doesn't happen by itself. And I think a lot of us are looking for help to kind of develop those rituals and practices that can help us, you know, tend to our inner lives, and to not think of our inner lives as inherently individualistic, right? Our inner lives too are connected. It's just a different way of being together. So I love that you're doing these series, and I hope it's an invitation for all of us to think about, well, what are the things that I have that I already do? And this is very much my philosophy to ritual making, is not to start with like, oh, I have to go on this huge pilgrimage to the Himalayas, or go on this very expensive retreat, or like buy these 8,000 new crystals and plants. Although if you want to do that, you know, good for you. But to start with the things that we're already doing in our lives that already give us a little glimpse of that sense of inner reflection or accompaniment. And so is it, you know, the bath that I take once a week, where I close my eyes and I don't play music and I'm just present for that half an hour with the world as it is? Or is it snuggle time with my kiddos? Or is it, you know, the time when I play my clarinet for the, you know, first time once a month? So like just finding those moments when you're really feeling connected at that deeper level, and then building some sense of a ritual around that kind of elevates it and ennobles it within the everyday. I think that's my philosophy to ritual making, is really starting with what we're already doing and giving it, you know, a little bit of sheen, rather than trying to impose something that's new and difficult and expensive onto our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm jumping around in a little sketch Katie and I had here because that was such a good introduction. You're such a pro. So I'd love to kind of hear if you were going to give, a starting place or a suggestion of what is something that folks who are watching this could try today or tomorrow or this week, do you have one that you would pull out from your book or your research, like this is the one that I like, if you're going to start someplace, try this one?
Yeah, well, let me answer that in two parts. I'm going to give you a process first, and then I'll give you a specific practice. Because in so many ways, what I don't want to do is kind of prescribe specific practices, but I want to help us all figure out what's right for us. And so the first thing to do is what I call ritual spotting. So that's exactly what we were talking about before, right? What are the things that I'm already doing in my life that feel like they could be the beginning of a ritual, things that I come back to time and again. But then there's kind of 3 steps that I take to take an everyday habit or a routine and turn it into a ritual. The first is to give it an intention. Now, that intention could be as simple as like, I want to feel joy, right? To speak to us. It could be like, I want to reconnect with that sense of joy. But it could also be maybe something like, actually, I know that to feel joy, I also need to feel grief. And rather than like numbing myself, I just need to like actually feel the weight of what the world is going through right now, right? Like there is enormous suffering, and it's healthy actually to feel that now and then, not to be overwhelmed by it, but to be able to connect with that. So maybe I want to feel that, or maybe I want to remember a loved one, right, on their birthday, or whatever it is. So setting an intention, so just bringing our conscious mind towards an intention is the first step. And then secondly, thinking about a way to pay attention while you're practicing the ritual. So let's say if you're in that bath, adding some delicious, whether it's bubble bath or something smelly or something, good smelly, obviously. Something that captures our 5 senses. Very often, if you think about religious liturgies, right, the worship services that religious communities have, they have things like beautiful music or stained glass windows or a shofar, right? There's all of these things that speak to our senses: hearing, seeing, touching, tasting, smelling, because it helps our minds pay attention to the thing that we're doing. So that's the second step. Find some way of in the practice paying attention. And then the third one is repetition. So coming back to the practice time and time again. Now, some people are really good at having like a daily discipline. I am not one of those people. I wish I was, the person with that amazing morning routine. But for me, what's a really good kind of rhythm is a weekly rhythm. So to give you a specific example of a practice, one of my favorite practices that I write about in the book is doing a tech Sabbath. So on Friday night, I turn off my phone and my laptop, and I literally hide them in my my bookshelf so I don't see them. And I try and spend kind of 24 hours without using my phone or my laptop. And that's very much inspired by the Jewish tradition of Shabbat. And importantly, Abraham Joshua Heschel, great Jewish theologian of the 20th century, talked about the Sabbath not being a time of like recharging our batteries so that you're like ready to hit the ground running, but it was about experiencing a taste of heaven, or he uses this phrase that you're entering a palace in time. And on the Sabbath in Jewish tradition, you're supposed to eat with the people you love and have, eat delicious food. You're even supposed to make love, so you really are, you're supposed to experience the full joy of what it is to be alive. And so rather than thinking of it as a time of preparation for the work week, it's actually a time of like delight and enjoyment. And it's the apex of the work week, right? We work so that we can have that taste of heaven rather than having that time to like go back to our, email inbox. And the way I kind of was inspired by that tradition to make a ritual was I light a little candle after I've turned everything off. And then I sing a little song that I learned in summer camp about like saying goodnight to the sun. And it's amazing because this is what ritual can do, is it kind of transforms your perception of the world. Right? The world hasn't changed. I've just turned on a candle and sang a song, but the way I experience it suddenly feels entirely new. So I like to imagine that it's like going on vacation, but in my own house. So it's a really nice way. If we can't travel through space so much right now, we can travel through time differently. So that's one practice that I love doing. Now, I totally understand. And I see someone in the comments saying like, oh, I don't think I can do that, but something smaller maybe. I feel you. Like, it was the first time I did it, I felt so awkward and I felt so embarrassed. So I totally get if that's not quite the right thing for you. But finding something that might help you feel like you're changing your experience of time. It might not be about singing, it might not be about candles. Maybe it's cooking a certain dish. Maybe it's actually having like 20 deep breaths in total quiet. Maybe it's going, I live in Brooklyn, so I don't have much of a view, but if you live more in a rural area, maybe it's going to look at a horizon once a week. So finding something that can help you just change your way of being, right? Just for a little amount of time. It doesn't have to be 24 hours. It can be maybe a smaller chunk, first of all. Having a practice like that, for me, gives a really healthy rhythm of a week in, week out, that, just helps me feel kind of at home in the world. One of my favorite Catholic, he was a priest, and then he left the priesthood, and he famously said that the best thing I ever did was the second best thing I ever did was to become a priest. The best thing I ever did was to leave the priesthood, which I love. The Irish poet John O'Donoghue, he talks about, if we have that kind of life where we're living in rhythm, for him, in his language, it was a way of having a holy life. So finding some way that we can have that rhythm, I think, is a really helpful thing, whatever we are, religiously or spiritually.
Yeah, you talked about rhythm a lot in the book, which I found really interesting, because that was something that even before I picked it up, I think a lot of us are kind of experiencing this sense of broken time, right? Like, I hear that discussed a lot, of people feeling like, I can't keep track of when things happen in the year anymore. Everything feels the same. Things happen very fast or very slow. And so I thought it was really interesting that so much of your research and the work that you've done on it is kind of this idea of reinstituting ritual and like cyclical natures into our lives to kind of have that sense of time. So I thought that was really fascinating that came up, when like that's been such a huge topic of conversation that I've seen, and something I've definitely felt personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it asks us really to shift the way we think about things, because we're used to thinking about, if you're creating a project plan or a campaign plan, right? You're thinking about time in a linear way. You're going to do this, then you're going to do this, then we're going to win the campaign, and then we're all going to celebrate. Right? Like, it's a very linear way of thinking. But when we think about it in this way, it's much more a circular way of thinking, right? We're moving through time again and again. And that's one of the pieces of wisdom I think we can glean from religious tradition, is that we don't live within this linear time. We live within what they would call liturgical time. So you're living the same festivals over and over again, right? Ramadan, Christmas, the high holy days, they come every year. Diwali. And so what it gives us, and I'm leaning on a wonderful nun this time, Joan Chittister, who talks about when we live in this kind of way of thinking about time, it's as if we are fruit and we are spiritually ripening. I just love that idea, that kind of every time we celebrate a festival or a ritual, right, across the year, it's not just that we're celebrating it in that moment, that one time, but we're kind of reconnecting with every other time that it's been celebrated. And so this is why sometimes things like, we're coming up towards Christmas, it can feel so special, because you're kind of reminded about what it was like for you as a kid. Then you're remembering it now, and then you're also kind of thinking about it. Well, what's it going to be like maybe when I'm a parent one day, or I'm with my nieces and nephews, or I'm an older person. So you have this sense of kind of living. It's like time travel, right? It's the same thing with the Sabbath that we talked about. You're kind of living it in a different way. And so for me, it's really valuable to pay attention to those ritual moments, because that's how we find meaning, right? It contextualizes our experience within something bigger. And so that sense that every time we practice something like a festival or a ritual, we're ripening spiritually. I just love that image.
I have not thought about this, but just this framing of like, sort of around and around. We have so many conventions that we go to that are a regular part of the practice of being in the HPA. And those things are gone this year. And it really does, it like influence your ability to track time and to like just how you feel? Because I know, like, you know, one of the rituals for a lot of HPA folks is that they go to the Esther Earl Ball at LeakyCon,
right.
and there was no Esther Earl Ball this year. And so
Yeah.
what does that mean, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I just haven't thought about like those conventions and kind of gatherings in the sense of like, these are rituals that we do that made us feel
Yes.
joyful and feel
Mhm.
Yes, and Katie, can I just emphasize something that you're saying? Because one of the ways we can mischaracterize rituals sometimes is that we think that they're just decorative, right? That they're just there to make life more beautiful or more joyful. But it's more than that. And I love that you're using the Esther Ball as an example, because the rituals that we celebrate also form us, right? Any ritual actually embodies a myth. And if you're familiar with Joseph Campbell's work, right, the great mythologist, he talks about the way in which every ritual is always retelling a story. And that when we're participating in that ritual, we are reminded of that story and the values it teaches. So when we're celebrating something like Esther Day, it's not just a fun gathering in which we see our friends again. It's actually a way of lifting up the values that Esther reminded us of, and that we as a community say that we value. So when we're not practicing that, we're losing that touch point with the values that we work towards as a community. So it's I like to say it's not just decorative, but it's formative. So these rituals are really important for a community to have a sense of, oh yeah, this is who we are, this is what we're about, this is why what we stand for.
Yeah. And like, I was having a strange thing in like June, especially, which is when normally, if we hadn't been to something by then, that would have been for sure a time where I literally just started, like, I kept having such strong memories of like airports coming up for me. And I kept feeling like, oh God, I'm like, I have to pack next weekend. And I was like, no, you don't, I'm not going anywhere. But like literally that kind of sense memory and kind of cycle is so ingrained after working here for so long at this point that it really was like, man, something feels very strange. Like something feels off. And I think sometimes we have a tendency to want to downplay things like that. I've seen some folks kind of be like, oh, like I really miss this convention, but I know that like that's not the most important thing right now. And like I think it's okay for it to be both, you know, like I think it's okay to understand that there's a reason that we did not go to those things this year, and there's a lot of suffering that everyone is processing, and also know that it's okay that they were important, you know.
Absolutely. As my therapist once told me, don't feel ashamed for the pain you did feel. You know, even if you know that you're fortunate compared to so many other people, as my God, I do, it doesn't actually help anyone to discount what you are feeling. So I think it's really important, Janae. Absolutely.
God, this is a very brief tangent, but just that sentiment of like the thing you feel still counts and don't discount it. When I had a kid, immediately after, as everyone on the planet knows, there is a long period of sleep deprivation that is truly horrific. As much as you're happy that the baby is there and you love it, there's a real period where you are like, is this insanity? I think I am very close. And I had so many people like during that period of my life that would say to me, like not thinking about what I'm doing, but just like stating like, oh God, I'm so tired today. And then they would immediately correct themselves and be like, oh, I mean, nothing compared to you. I know. And I'm just like, right. But like the fact that like I have a wacky sleep schedule right now doesn't mean you aren't also tired.
Right.
And it does.
I'm laughing because I 100% am one of these people who's constantly talk to you like, I'm tired, but you must be so much more tired.
And I just like there's something like there was nothing comforting to like be having people be like, oh, I don't feel good. Oh, but you're suffering way more.
Right.
And you're just like, wait, but that's not actually connection. Like,
That's right. Well, and there's the flip side of that, and this is something that Brene Brown writes about in her work, where people who maybe who got a great night's sleep would probably also avoid talking about that because they don't want to make you feel bad. And it's actually, again, it's kind of an inverse of what you think you should do, because what Brene talks about is that actually it's important for us to celebrate things that are great in our lives, even when someone else might be struggling with something, because it means that they know that we appreciate what we have. And it's actually a way of reminding everyone, of like, well, these are important things, these are valuable things. So yeah, the culture that we have of like discounting ourselves and the comparing of like, none of that is good, right? Like, so I completely hear you, Katie. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I hope you're getting some more sleep these days.
Oh yeah, I mean now he's a toddler and sleeps more like, he's got like circadian. Speaking of rhythm, he's got like circadian rhythm.
There you go.
When it's dark out, it's the best.
Way better.
I never knew I'd miss that ritual. Janae, do you have a question that could get us back on track?
Yeah. So I mean, we could talk about ritual stuff for ages, I feel like. But one question I wanted to make sure we got to, because I've been asking everyone, is what does joy actually mean to you? Because in the reading that I've been doing, in other folks we've talked to about this, there are a lot of different answers. And it's seems to be something that's very like deeply rooted for folks and deeply rooted in philosophy and experience. And so I'm really curious like how you would define that word.
Whew, Janae, leave a big question for the end. My God. So my mind is going.
You got all warmed up first, you should be ready.
My mind is going in a couple of different places, and I kind of want to share a few thoughts, if I may.
Yeah.
The first one is that I think there's a difference for me between like happiness and joy. And joy has something deeper and more enduring about it for me. And that it's not something that comes and goes, but to some extent can be an orientation to life. That it's something you're always seeking, or you're always seeking to cultivate, right? That joy is a practice, not just something that comes over you, right, when you're on a roller coaster ride, although it can. Like an actual roller coaster, not 2020, to be clear. But a more interesting question, or a more interesting answer, I think, would be that in the society that we live, and particularly within the kind of capitalist economy that we live, there is a constant pressure to want more and to do better, to be faster, to have more, to earn more, all of that kind of stuff. And I am not immune from that. I feel it every day, and I'm very reactive to it. So part of me thinks of joy actually as a political stance, which pushes back against that pressure and says, I have enough. That true joy is about contentment, and is about, I love this comment just coming through here about like an inner calm and a connectedness and a sufficiency with what we have. And that's, I really want to be clear. I'm not saying that, right, if you don't have enough to eat, if you're not safe, that is not what I'm talking about. But in a privileged position like I have, to interrupt that race, or that rat race, and to be inspired by someone like Trisha Hersey, who has the nap ministry on social media. If you're not following her, my God, you got to follow her, where she talks about resistance, right? Like, I think that kind of insight is where true joy can be found, which is not prevalent on outward success, or the kind of laurels or prizes that we win, but on a radical acceptance of the world as it is, and the beauty of who we are as we are. I think one day I hope to know what that means, like personally, but when I learn in divinity school, that's what I'm taking away from what joy means.
Yeah.
I love that. And wonder. Sorry, someone in the comments just said joy is feeling at peace and wonder.
Beautiful.
And I love the, like, I don't feel like juxtaposition is the right word, because they're not like in competition to each other, but like, I love those things simultaneously, of like feeling peaceful, but also feeling the kind of excitement and joy and curiosity that come with wonder. Like,
And there's reason for that, Katie. I mean, so the structure of the book is about connecting with self, others, nature, and transcendence. And in that final chapter, looking at transcendence, one of the things that happens a lot is that experience of wonder, right? Of feeling connected with something bigger than ourselves. And it's actually an amazing joy strategy, because when we encounter, and it might be a beautiful forest or a sunset, or it might be like looking at something through a microscope and the wonder of science, or holding a newborn, or whatever it is, being at a Beyonce concert, right? Whatever kind of helps us connect with something bigger or see the world in a different way, it disturbs our me-centered world, which often can make us not very joyful. And so when we're allowing ourselves to be disrupted like that, actually it can lead exactly to what you're describing, that sense of peace and wonder and joy. So I think practices, not just of connecting to each other one-to-one like this, but connecting with something bigger than ourselves, are amazing ways of reconnecting with that feeling.
Yeah. I just flashed, of course, because like we're, the Harry Potter Alliance, but I just flashed to the moment of walking into the Universal Studios park for the first time.
Wow.
And just having a moment of deep wonder at something that is very capitalist and very commercial, and I know that. And also because walking into that space is walking into this space made real of not only a story that's very important, but a community that's been important to me for 20 years. It's been like, that's the longest I've done anything short of breathing and walking, and like that, and being in like those kind of spaces is a great piece of wonder also.
But I have to dig for it, but somebody caught a picture of me and my face the first time I walked into Diagon Alley. It's a friend who had been there before, and she like ran ahead because she knew what was and turned around and captured like the moment. It's a great photo.
That's awesome.
It is a good one. But for a less commercial thing, because it's 2020, I started a garden this year.
Yes.
That has been, you like talking about like a circular ritual and everything.
Absolutely.
That's been such a like very simple, literally down to earth sense of wonder, of something that's like, man, I put this seed in the ground and then it got tall, care of it, and then it grew a pepper, which I ate. Like, whoa. And it feels like, and I part of me wonders is like, if we were not so divorced from nature and our food system, like would I feel a sense of wonder at this pepper? Like perhaps not, but like maybe, because maybe there would be a little bit more ritual around like growing and eating it. But
absolutely. And if you think back to so many religious cultures of antiquity, they were built around natural cycles, right? They were built around harvest and sowing. They were built around winter and summer, or rainy and dry. Like that was the way in which religious culture was shaped, was by the miracle of seeing exactly as you're describing, like food growing. And this is a culturally specific comment, but in England, even though we talked about it being such a secular country, in England, gardening is like a national pastime. And I really think of gardening as England's most predominant spiritual practice, right? Because you also have to encounter the horrors of like slugs that just come and eat everything. And it was like, you didn't ask for it, and you now have to deal with it. And like, what does that mean about suffering, right? Like you have to have patience. You have to, all of these big kind of spiritual themes are embodied within the tending of the garden. So I love that example, Katie.
What does that mean about suffering? That just like, I had a squirrel that chopped my tomato plant in half this year.
Why?
Great tragedy that week. But I like, I didn't think I was that much of like a city person totally divorced from gardening, and then I started a garden and had an okra plant, and it produced a ton of okra. And I missed a pod, and right at the end of the season, and so the plant's kind of, it's lived its life, it's dying. And I went out there to pull it, and the pod, I picked it up and shook it. It was like, oh, right, there's like seeds in the pot still that I can save, and then I can plant it again. It was just this moment of like, holy shit, this is how nature works. I can it's not dead, really. It was just such a
and Janae, if you wanted to feel theological, you could say that's how we work too, right? Like we're coming out of this 2020 year in which it feels like a part of, at least for me, a part of me has died, right? Whether it's the reality that 5 million more people voted for a quasi-fascist white supremacist president, right? Or it's the callousness in which so many people clearly have for one another's health and well-being in the midst of COVID. Like that has killed my spirit. Like it makes me so sad. So that story of the seeds, I hope, can also be a story for us. And like maybe in the spring, right, as this vaccine gets rolled out, as we transition to a new presidency, maybe there's a new seed that can grow in us as well, in which there's more goodness and courage and hope.
Yeah.
If you shake us, there's still seeds rattling around.
There's still seeds, there's still life.
You'll find some.
There's hope rattling around there.
Rattling around there.
Just dry, and like
dried out, but it can be planted.
Oh my gosh.
Oh gosh. Well, Casper, it has been fantastic to talk to you. I want to let folks know where they can get cool stuff. One, if you would like to get Casper's book, please do so here. I think the link was also dropped in the chat. There's an entire list of good books about joy and ritual and spirituality and activism on this list. I definitely recommend it. I was telling Casper before we started, I had to turn in my library book like 2 days before this, but it was great. Can imagine it right here. Also, if you have not actually signed up for this series yet, if you do that, you will be sent a free toolkit from us that has some suggestions for rituals, some resources that you can look up, some ways to kind of reconnect and process. And you also get reminders about our next session, which is going to be this Thursday, the 10th at 8:30 Eastern, with Becca from the Dinner Party, which is also a group that is featured in Casper's book. So it's all coming full circle. Yeah, anything else that you'd like the audience to know? Where else can we find you, Casper?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you again so much for having me. Yeah, please follow me on social media. I'm usually at CasperTK. I hope you enjoy the book, and yeah, just keep doing what you're all doing. And as I said, I think it's so important for us to be in community and be in spaces where we have reflection and then place for action. And I'm just so inspired by what everyone in the HPA is doing in the chapters in the national organization. You're all incredible. So keep going. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Casper. You too, honestly.
Yeah, we need your work real bad also. So keep doing what you're doing too.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, friends. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Jen.